let's bring in the former French Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin, joining me from Paris. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, can I ask you, do you believe, I assume you do as your, French leader, that this will revive a two-state solution process? Or do you think it will just get massive backlash from Israel and the United States, which doesn't recognize this move?
Well, we hope that it is going to be a new departure. This decision to recognize the state of Palestine comes because of the failure of previous peace processes. We've seen the Oslo process, the Camp David process, the Taba process, the Annapolis process, they all failed. And the idea today is to reverse the former process, not to have the recognition at the end of the day after solving all the difficulties, but starting with the recognition, which is a very strong gesture toward Palestine and toward the Arab world, and of course trying now to tackle all the different problems that we are facing, but starting with the recognition. Behind the recognition, there are two principles that are concerned. The first one is the respect of international law, self-determination for every people. And the second principle we want to recognize is a principle of justice. We see the drama, the ongoing drama in the region. We see the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza. We see the policy of colonization and annexation of West Bank. This has to stop. And we are sending a very strong message to Israel and to the United States. Whatever you do, the principle of the recognition of Palestine cannot be erased. It is part of the international world.
How do you pressure then? Because, every country, certainly many Europeans, before Trump came along, to an extent, the Biden administration was trying to get it to, abide by the rules of the road and international law in its war against Hamas. Spain now has pledged a permanent ban on the sale of weapons to Israel. Belgium announced a plan for a ban on imports from Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. But how do you actually pressure Israel to do this? Because, as I say, while the United States is standing by, you mentioned Marco Rubio, President Trump has had endless discussions with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the result seems to be, okay, this is just a decision for Israel, they're free to do whatever they want.
Well, as a matter of fact, we have very clearly to look at the picture. The Europeans, they have not done everything they can to put pressure on Israel. They have not decided to adopt sanctions on Israel. We have an EU association agreement with Israel, which is very important for the Israeli economy. If we suspend this agreement, it will take weeks or maybe very little months for Israel to be in the obligation to react. Concerning the United States, they have done nothing but to accompany the willingness of Israel to go forward on its political project. So we need to open the eyes on what is going on both in Gaza and in the West Bank. There is an ongoing genocide. This is the responsibility of every citizen of the world to feel responsible for what's going on. And the Trump administration cannot forget its own responsibility. And we must put the necessary pressure. So it's through international pressure and action. What will be decided in the General Assembly is, of course, very important. We may consider it's very symbolic, and that's why the Arab states, the European states, the Trump administration must realize that if we want to stop the tragedy in Gaza, with all the risk of an extension of war, because we have to understand that the consequences might be more terrorism for the region and elsewhere around the world, and more nuclear proliferation, because the only message that we are sending for the countries of the region is that if you don't have a nuclear capability, you are not protected. So it is more violence, more tensions, more inhumanity that will develop in this region, and I think it's time to take responsibility for what is going on.
You know, you stood up in the UN General Assembly, you remember it well, many people remember it well, in 2003, and you gave a speech just before then George W. Bush's administration wanted to go to war in Iraq, and it was about so-called weapons of mass destruction. France had a different idea. It did not believe in the rush to war. Here's what you said.
No one today can claim that the path of war will be shorter than the path of inspections. No one can claim that it would lead to a safer, more just, more stable world. For war is always the sanction of failure. Would this be our sole recourse in the face of the many challenges at this time? So let us give the United Nations inspectors the time they need for their mission to succeed.
You were foreign minister back then, and I also interviewed your president, Jacques Chirac. He said the very same thing. Give them more time, the inspectors. And in the end, he was right. The war was a disaster. There was no weapons of mass destruction. And we know what that war did for the Middle East and, in fact, all the blowback it happened. But France was isolated back then. And I wonder what it felt like being isolated when you were trying to tell your friends, the US, to think a little bit, to spend a little more time thinking about this, like people are trying to tell Israel. Remember, Joe Biden said to Israel right after October 7th, don't do what we did in Iraq.
Well, of course, it's hugely painful. I'm afraid among the main reasons for Benjamin Netanyahu to follow this policy, there are many domestic reasons, personal reasons, and a strong ideological stand, which is through force you can get security and peace, which is the biggest mistake any country can make. Everything we learned in the last 25 years shows us that force without a strong political strategy can get you nowhere but more violence and more terrorism. And we know already for sure that after 2 years of a long fight against Hamas in Gaza, there is almost the same number of people belonging to Hamas, 25,000, than previously. That means terrorism, you cannot kill terrorism just by killing soldiers. You need to fight the ideology through another way. And you have to give hope to the people of Palestine. If you don't give hope to the people of Palestine, how would they understand that they have to disregard the Hamas messages? So the responsibility for Europeans and Americans today is to choose the path of responsibility, to take the lessons of history. And I think it's very important for the US administration today to understand that everywhere the credibility of the US diplomacy is tackled. In Ukraine, the US administration is showing powerlessness. In the Middle East, the real boss is not Donald Trump. The boss is Benjamin Netanyahu. And Donald Trump has to follow, even when he doesn't want to do so, like in Iran. He has to follow Benjamin Netanyahu, who is playing with him. Okay. At the end of the day, this is not creating a stable world.